The security camera caught it all, children destroying months of careful landscaping while their mother dialed 911, screaming about trespassing. But when the police arrived and saw the footage, everyone discovered the shocking truth that would flip this neighborhood dispute upside down. What seemed like a simple property line argument became something far more sinister, and the woman who thought she was calling for help had just exposed the very crime she'd been hiding all along. The morning sun cast long shadows across Margaret Chen's pristine backyard as she knelt beside her prize-winning rose bushes, carefully deadheading the spent blooms. 3 years of meticulous cultivation had transformed this half-acre into a suburban paradise, every plant strategically placed, every stone pathway perfectly aligned, every inch of the irrigation system precisely calibrated. She paused, wiping sweat from her brow, and admired the crown jewel of her landscaping efforts, the new infinity pool that seemed to merge seamlessly with the horizon. The contractors had finished just last month, and the final inspection had passed with flying colors. After 2 years of permit battles with the city, she'd finally achieved her dream. "Mom, can we swim yet?" Her 8-year-old daughter Lily's voice carried from the kitchen window. "After lunch, sweetheart. Let the chemicals settle a bit more." Margaret stood, brushing soil from her gardening gloves, when a sharp crack echoed from the fence line. She turned to see a baseball rolling across her immaculate lawn, followed by the sound of splintering wood. "Sorry," came a young voice from the neighboring yard, the Hendersons. Margaret's jaw tightened. Ever since they'd moved in 6 months ago, it had been one issue after another. Late-night parties, music bleeding through the shared fence, and now this, the third baseball this week to land in her garden. She walked toward the property line, where a section of her cedar fence showed fresh damage. Through the gap, she could see the Henderson children, 3 boys ranging from maybe 6 to 12, playing in their overgrown backyard. The oldest one, a lanky kid with shaggy brown hair, was climbing the fence to retrieve his ball. "Excuse me," Margaret called out. "Could you please be more careful? You've damaged my fence." The boy froze mid-climb, then dropped back into his own yard. Within seconds, Karen Henderson appeared, storming across her lawn like a woman possessed. Even from a distance, Margaret could see the fury radiating from her neighbor's angular frame. "Ah. You serious right now?" Karen shouted, her voice shrill enough to make birds take flight from nearby trees. "It's just a stupid fence." Margaret took a deep breath, reminding herself to stay calm. "I'm just asking for some consideration. This is the 3rd time this week, and oh, spare me the sob story about your precious yard." Karen's face flushed red as she gestured wildly. "Maybe if you weren't so obsessed with making the rest of us look bad with your perfect little paradise, we wouldn't have these problems." The accusation hit Margaret like a slap. She'd worked 60-hour weeks as a software engineer to afford this house, this dream. Every plant, every stone, every improvement had been earned through sacrifice and careful planning. "I'm not trying to make anyone look bad," Margaret said, forcing her voice to remain level. "I just want to maintain my property." "Your property?" Karen's laugh was harsh, bitter. "That pool of yours is probably illegal anyway. I bet you didn't get proper permits." "The setback requirements alone, every permit was approved by the city," Margaret interrupted, feeling her composure crack. "I have all the documentation." "We'll see about that." Karen's eyes glittered with malice. "I'm calling code enforcement. And if one more ball lands in your precious garden, maybe you'll finally learn that the world doesn't revolve around you." With that, she spun on her heel and stalked back toward her house, leaving Margaret standing alone by the damaged fence. The encounter left her hands shaking with suppressed anger and something else, a cold premonition that this was far from over. An hour later, Margaret was inside preparing lunch when the doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw a tired-looking man in a polo shirt holding a clipboard. "I'm Rick Torres from City Code Enforcement. We received a complaint about unpermitted construction." Margaret's heart sank, but she invited him in and spent the next hour walking him through every document, every inspection report, every approval stamp. Torres seemed increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted. "Everything appears to be in perfect order," he finally admitted. "Someone gave us some inaccurate information. I apologize for the inconvenience." As his truck pulled away, Margaret noticed Karen watching from her kitchen window. Even at this distance, she could feel the woman's frustration radiating like heat waves. The afternoon brought no peace. Margaret was helping Lily with her art project at the kitchen table when shouts erupted from next door. Through the window, she could see the Henderson boys engaged in what looked like a full-scale war game, using her fence as cover while they hurled water balloons at each other. "Stay inside," Margaret told Lily, then walked out to assess the damage. Her heart nearly stopped. Water balloons had exploded against her prize roses, and muddy footprints tracked across her vegetable garden. Worse, one of the boys, the middle one, maybe 8 years old, was actually inside her yard, having squeezed through the gap in the damaged fence. "Hey!" Margaret called out. "You need to get out of my yard right now." The boy looked up, startled, clutching another water balloon. For a moment, he seemed ready to comply. Then Karen's voice cut through the air like a whip. "Don't you dare listen to her, Tyler. She has no right to tell you where you can play." Margaret couldn't believe what she was hearing. "This is private property. He's trespassing. It's a backyard, not Fort Knox." Karen had emerged from her house, cell phone in hand. "Kids will be kids. Not in my garden." Margaret's patience finally snapped. "Look what they've done to my roses." "Oh, boo-hoo." Karen's voice dripped with mock sympathy. "A few drops of water won't kill your precious flowers. Maybe if you weren't such a control freak about every blade of grass, get your son out of my yard now, or I'm calling the police." Karen's expression transformed, her face lighting up with vindictive glee. "Actually, that's a great idea." She raised her phone to her ear. 911. "I need to report a woman who's threatening children and trying to prevent kids from playing in their own neighborhood." Margaret stared in shock as Karen began spinning an elaborate tale of harassment and intimidation. The woman was actually claiming that Margaret had threatened her children, that she was some kind of neighborhood menace who couldn't stand the sight of children having fun. "She's got this pull that's probably illegal," Karen continued into the phone, pacing dramatically as her boys watched with growing excitement. "And now she's screaming at little kids for accidentally dropping a ball in her yard. I'm honestly scared she might do something violent." The performance was so outrageous, so completely divorced from reality, that Margaret felt like she was trapped in some kind of nightmare. She pulled out her own phone, hands trembling as she dialed. "This is harassment," she said loud enough for Karen to hear. "I'm documenting everything." But as she started recording, something caught her eye that made her blood run cold. Tyler Henderson wasn't just standing in her garden anymore, he was methodically destroying it. Under his mother's distracted supervision, he was pulling up her carefully planted herbs, stomping on her lettuce seedlings, and using his water balloons to flood the irrigation channels she'd spent weeks perfecting, and his brothers had joined him, through the damaged fence. The two other boys were passing him more ammunition, not just water balloons now, but handfuls of dirt and small rocks. They were turning her garden into a war zone while their mother told 911 that Margaret was the aggressor. "Stop!" Margaret rushed toward them. "You're destroying months of work. Don't you dare touch my children!" Karen screamed, though Margaret was still 20 feet away. "Officer, she's charging at them right now. Send someone immediately." Margaret's hands shook as she held up her phone, making sure she captured every moment of the destruction. The boys seemed energized by their mother's drama, escalating their assault on her property. They'd moved beyond the vegetables now and were targeting her flower beds, ripping up bulbs she'd planted last fall. The oldest boy, emboldened by his mother's protective shrieking, picked up a decorative stone from her pathway and hurled it directly at her pool house window. The glass shattered with a crystalline crash that seemed to echo through the entire neighborhood. That's when Margaret noticed something that changed everything. Hidden among the tools and debris the boys had been using was something that didn't belong to them, something that had been tucked behind her pool equipment. Something she'd been wondering about for weeks. A small, weathered plastic bag, and inside it, even from this distance, she could see what looked like small white packets. Margaret's heart hammered as the pieces clicked into place. Karen's paranoid behavior. Her immediate hostility toward any authority figures. Her desperation to keep Margaret from getting too close to the fence line. The woman wasn't just a difficult neighbor, she was hiding something in Margaret's yard, and now, while Karen performed her victim act for the 911 dispatcher, her children were about to expose the very secret she'd been trying to protect. Part 2. The sirens grew louder as Margaret's mind raced, her phone still recording the systematic destruction of her garden. Tyler Henderson had discovered the hidden bag and was now shaking it curiously, white packets spilling onto the muddy ground near her pool equipment. "Put that down." Karen's voice cracked with panic, her 911 performance forgotten as she saw what her son had found. "Tyler, get away from there right now." But it was too late. The boy held up one of the small packets, examining it with the innocent curiosity of a child who'd found an interesting treasure. "Mom, what's this stuff? It looks like..." "Drop it." Karen screamed, abandoning her phone call entirely. She started climbing the fence with desperate efficiency, her earlier righteous indignation replaced by raw terror. Margaret zoomed in with her camera, her hands steadying as she realized the magnitude of what she was witnessing. The packets were clearly drug-related. She'd seen enough crime shows to recognize the telltale packaging. But more than that, she was capturing evidence of Karen's escalating panic, her frantic attempts to reach the stash before anyone else could see it. Are you still there?" The 911 operator's voice carried from Karen's abandoned phone, lying in the grass where she dropped it in her haste. The sound of car doors slamming in the front driveway announced the arrival of law enforcement. Margaret felt a surge of validation. Let them see this. Let them witness who the real problem was in this neighborhood. Officer Janet Mills rounded the corner of the house first, a compact woman in her 40s with sharp, observant eyes. Her partner, a younger man Margaret didn't recognize, followed close behind. They took in the scene with professional assessment: the destroyed garden, the broken window, the children scattered across both properties, and 2 women in clear distress. "I'm the one who called," Karen gasped, still halfway over the fence. Her voice was breathless from exertion and panic. "This woman has been harassing my children." Officer Mills surveyed the damage around them: trampled plants, muddy footprints, shattered glass, and her expression grew skeptical. "This is harassment. She threatened them." Karen's voice rose to near hysteria. "She came charging at my boys while they were just playing." "In my yard," Margaret said quietly, still holding her phone. "Officer, I've been recording everything. You can see exactly what happened." Tyler Henderson, still clutching the mysterious packet, wandered toward his mother's voice. Karen saw him coming and her face went white. With a burst of desperate energy, she threw herself over the fence, landing hard in Margaret's flower bed, and crushing the last of the undamaged roses. "Give me that." She lunged for her son, trying to snatch the packet from his hands. Stop right there," Officer Mills commanded, her hand moving instinctively toward her utility belt. "Everyone needs to calm down and stay where you are." But Karen was beyond rational thought. She grappled with Tyler, trying to pry the packet loose while he held on with the stubborn grip of a confused 8-year-old. "It's not what it looks like," Karen babbled, her words tumbling over each other. "This isn't mine. Someone must have planted it. Margaret probably put it there to frame me." The accusation was so absurd that Margaret almost laughed. "I planted drugs in my own yard to frame you? Why would I? Because you're obsessed with getting rid of us." Karen's voice cracked as she finally wrestled the packet away from Tyler. "You've been documenting everything, calling the city on us, trying to make us look bad." Officer Mills stepped forward, her voice firm but not unkind. I need you to hand me whatever you're holding." "I want a lawyer," Karen said immediately, clutching the packet against her chest like a lifeline. "I'm not saying anything else without a lawyer." The words hung in the air like a confession. Margaret felt a cold satisfaction as she watched realization dawn on Officer Mills' face. Innocent people didn't typically demand lawyers when asked to hand over mysterious packets found in their neighbor's yard. "Martinez," Officer Mills called to her partner, who was already moving toward the fence line. "We are going to need to secure this scene." The younger officer began photographing the area while Mills approached Karen with careful deliberation. "For everyone's safety, I need you to slowly place whatever you're holding on the ground and step back. This is harassment." Karen's defiance cracked, revealing the panic underneath. "You're taking her word over mine." She's the one who's been causing problems. Margaret held up her phone. Officer, I have everything recorded. You can see exactly how this started and what's been happening. For the first time, Karen seemed to notice that Margaret had been filming. Her face went through a series of expressions: confusion, realization, and then pure rage. You've been recording my children. Without permission, she shrieked, latching onto this new grievance with desperate intensity. That's illegal. I'll sue you for violation of privacy. In my own backyard. Margaret couldn't hide her incredulity. Recording people who are trespassing and destroying my property. Officer Mills had heard enough. I need you to comply. Right now. Place the item on the ground. Karen's shoulders sagged as the fight went out of her. She looked around at the damage her children had caused, at the officers documenting everything, at Margaret standing calmly with her phone full of evidence. The packet slipped from her fingers and landed in the mud among the destroyed vegetables. Mills carefully retrieved it with a gloved hand, holding it up to the light. Even Margaret could see the telltale powder inside, the professional packaging. That spoke of serious criminal activity. Where did this come from? Mills asked. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Her boys had gone quiet, sensing that their game had transformed into something far more serious than they understood. I want that lawyer now, she whispered. Officer Martinez finished photographing the immediate area and approached his partner. There's more back here, he said quietly, but not quietly enough. Looks like there's been a regular stash behind the pool equipment. Several more packages, plus what looks like cash. Margaret's knees went weak. 4 weeks, she'd been attributing Karen's hostility to simple neighbor friction. She'd thought the woman was just territorial, maybe stressed from the move. Instead, her property had been used as a drug depot, and Karen's campaign of harassment had been designed to keep her away from the fence line. How long has this been going on? Margaret asked. Though she was afraid of the answer, Mills looked up from her evidence collection. We'll need to process everything, but judging by the weathering on some of this packaging, I'd say several months at least. Several months. Margaret thought back to all the times she'd felt like she was being watched, all the occasions when Karen had erupted into inexplicable fury over minor issues. The woman hadn't been protecting her children's right to play, she'd been protecting her drug operation. I never gave permission for anything to be stored on my property, Margaret said clearly, wanting no ambiguity in the official record. We understand that, Mills assured her. From what we can see here, and from what I assume is on your recording, you're the victim in this situation. Karen made a sound somewhere between a sob and a snarl. Victim. She's been tormenting us since. We moved in. Calling code enforcement, complaining about every little thing. Because you were using my yard as a drug stash. Margaret's composure finally cracked. Every time I got close to that fence, you'd create some distraction, some crisis to pull my attention away. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. The late-night noises she'd attributed to parties. The time she'd found her gate unlatched in the morning. Karen's immediate antagonism toward anyone in authority, from code enforcement to pool inspectors. She's lying. Karen's voice rose to a shriek as Martinez emerged from behind the pool house carrying a small duffel bag. That stuff isn't mine. I've never seen it before. But her protest sounded hollow even to her own children, who were staring at their mother with growing confusion and fear. Officer Mills stood up, brushing dirt from her gloves. You have the right to remain silent. As the Miranda rights echoed across the destroyed garden, Margaret felt a complex mix of emotions. Vindication, certainly. After months of escalating harassment, the truth was finally coming to light. But also sadness for those 3 boys, who were about to learn that their mother's war against the neighbor lady had been about something far more serious than property lines and rose bushes. Tyler, the middle child who'd found the first packet, tugged on Officer Martinez's uniform. Is my mom in trouble? The question hung in the air as Karen Henderson was led away in handcuffs, still protesting her innocence to anyone who would listen. Her boys watched in stunned silence as their world collapsed around them, and Margaret realized that while justice might be served, the real consequences of this day were just beginning to unfold. The police station's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across Margaret's face as she sat in the cramped interview room, her phone connected to Detective Sarah Reeves' laptop. For the past hour, they'd been reviewing the footage frame by frame. And each replay revealed new details that made the scope of Karen's operation increasingly clear. "Stop there," Detective Reeves said, pointing at the screen. "See how she immediately knows to look behind the pull equipment? That's not random panic, that's someone who knows exactly where things are hidden." Margaret studied the frozen image of Karen's face, caught in a moment of pure terror as she spotted Tyler with the drug packet. "I keep thinking about all the times she'd start screaming about something whenever I got near that fence. The complaints about my pull construction, the accusations about my sprinkler system, classic misdirection." Reeves nodded, making notes. "Keep people focused on manufactured drama so they don't notice the real criminal activity." "How long did you say the Hendersons have been your neighbors?" 6 months. They moved in right after New Year's." Margaret paused the video as another detail struck her. "Detective, there's something else. About 3 weeks ago, I found my back gate unlocked in the morning. I thought maybe the wind had blown it open, but now you're wondering if someone was accessing your yard at night." Reeves leaned back in her chair. "We found evidence of regular foot traffic behind your pool house, compressed earth, disturbed vegetation. This wasn't a one-time thing." The implications made Margaret's stomach turn. While she and Lily had been sleeping peacefully inside, strangers had been conducting drug transactions just yards from their bedroom window. Her beautiful backyard, her sanctuary, had been contaminated by criminal activity she'd been completely unaware of. "What happens now?" Margaret asked. "Well, Karen Henderson isn't talking without her lawyer present, but the evidence speaks pretty loudly. We are looking at drug possession with intent to distribute, using private property for criminal activity, child endangerment." Reeves ticked off charges on her fingers. "And that's just the start. We need to figure out how extensive this operation was." A knock interrupted them. Officer Mills peered around the door. "Detective, you're going to want to see this." They followed Mills down the hallway to another interview room, where the 3 Henderson boys sat with a social worker. Through the one-way mirror, Margaret watched Tyler methodically drawing with crayons while his older brother stared at nothing and the youngest sucked his thumb. "The social worker has been talking with them," Mills explained quietly. "Trying to understand their home situation. Tyler's been very informative." As if on cue, Tyler held up his drawing, a crude but recognizable sketch of 2 houses with stick figures. "This is me and Mom putting presents in the ladies' yard," he announced proudly to the social worker. "Mom said we were playing a secret game, but we couldn't tell anyone 'cause it would spoil the surprise." Margaret felt sick. "He thinks it was a game." "Gets worse," Mills continued. "The oldest boy, Jake, just told us that men would sometimes come to their house at night. His mom would give them presents from a box in her closet, and they'd give her money. She told the kids it was her secret job, helping people with special deliveries." Detective Reeves cursed under her breath. She involved her children in drug trafficking and convinced them it was normal. This is going to be a nightmare for Child Protective Services. Through the mirror, Margaret watched Jake finally speak. His voice barely audible through the intercom. "Is Mom really not coming home tonight? Tyler keeps asking when she'll be back." The social worker, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, chose her words carefully. "Your mom made some mistakes that grown-ups have to fix. You're going to stay with a nice family for a while until we figure everything out." "But what about our stuff?" Tyler asked, looking up from his drawing. "What about our house?" Margaret turned away from the window, unable to watch anymore. These children were innocent victims of their mother's choices, and their lives had just been shattered as completely as her garden. "There's more," Officer Mills said, leading them back toward the main desk. "We got a warrant for the Henderson house. Want to guess what we found in the closet Tyler mentioned?" She gestured toward a table covered with evidence bags. Margaret counted at least 20 packages similar to the ones found in her yard, along with scales, baggies, and several $1,000s in cash. "Karen Henderson wasn't just storing drugs on your property," Detective Reeves explained. "She was running a full distribution operation out of that house, with 3 young children living there. The stuff in your yard was overflow inventory." "But why my yard specifically?" Margaret asked. She could have used anywhere. Actually, no. Reeves pulled up a map on her tablet. Look at the geography. Your property backs up to Maple Street, easy vehicle access through the alley. But more importantly, if anything went wrong, if someone got suspicious or law enforcement showed up, she had the perfect cover story. What do you mean? Think about it. If police found drugs behind your pool house, who would they suspect first? The known troublemaker neighbor who'd been causing problems and calling in complaints, or the innocent mother whose children just happened to play near the fence line? The calculation was breathtakingly cynical. Karen hadn't just been using Margaret's property, she'd been setting her up as a potential fall guy. Every complaint, every manufactured crisis, every attempt to paint Margaret as an unreasonable neighbor had been building toward this moment. She was creating a paper trail, Margaret realized. All those calls to code enforcement, the 911 call. Today, she was establishing a pattern that would make me look like the problem. Exactly. And if you'd ever found the stash yourself and called police, who would they believe? The frazzled single mom with 3 kids, or the obsessive neighbor who'd been harassing the family for months? Margaret sank into a nearby chair. As the full scope of Karen's manipulation became clear. Every interaction had been calculated, every conflict manufactured for a purpose. She'd been played from the very beginning. There's something else we need to discuss, Detective Reeves continued. The men Tyler mentioned, the ones who came for special deliveries, we need to identify them. This operation was bigger than just Karen. You think there are others? Drug distribution networks don't operate in isolation. Karen was either working for someone or with someone. The amount of product we found suggests this was organized. As if summoned by their conversation, Officer Martinez approached with a tablet in his hands. Detective, we just got the phone records. Karen Henderson was in regular contact with at least 6 different numbers over the past 3 months. All burner phones, but we're running location data. And 3 of those phones pinged towers near Margaret's house in the last week alone. Someone was definitely coordinating pickups and deliveries. Margaret felt a chill run down her spine. You saying there are other people who know where I live? Who've been watching my house? It's possible, Reeves admitted. We are going to need to take precautions. Karen's arrest is going to disrupt their operation, and people with this much money involved don't just walk away quietly. The detectives' words hit Margaret like a physical blow. Not only had her property been violated and her peace shattered, but now she might be in actual danger. The criminals Karen had been working with wouldn't know or care that Margaret was innocent, they'd only know that their drug stash had been discovered and their partner was in jail. What kind of precautions? Margaret asked, though she dreaded the answer. We are going to increase patrols in your neighborhood, and I'd recommend staying somewhere else for a few days while we sort this out. Do you have family you can stay with? Margaret thought of Lily, probably at her after-school program right now, blissfully unaware that their quiet suburban life had just exploded. How was she supposed to explain this? How could she tell her 8-year-old daughter that they couldn't go home because mommy's yard had been used for drug trafficking? My sister lives about an hour away, she said finally. But detective, what about my house? My job? I can't just disappear indefinitely. Hopefully it won't be indefinite. But until we understand the scope of this network and identify the other players, we need to assume they might see you as either a threat or an opportunity. Before Margaret could ask what that meant, Martinez's radio crackled to life. The voice was urgent, professional, and immediately commanded everyone's attention. All units, we have a possible break-in at 847 Maple Street. Neighbors reporting suspicious activity at the Henderson residence. Requesting immediate backup, 847 Maple Street. Karen's house, Detective Reeves was already moving, grabbing her jacket and keys. Someone's making a move faster than we expected, she said grimly. Margaret, I need you to call your sister right now. Pack whatever you need and get out of here. But what about now? The detective's voice brooked no argument. Whatever's happening at that house, it's connected to what we found in your yard. And if they are desperate enough to risk a break-in while the place is under police surveillance, they are desperate enough to do whatever it takes to protect their operation. As sirens wailed outside the police station, Margaret fumbled for her phone with shaking hands. In the space of a single day, she'd gone from worrying. The abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town felt like a scene from a nightmare as Margaret crouched behind a stack of shipping containers, her heart hammering against her ribs. She shouldn't be here. Detective Reeves had explicitly told her to stay at her sister's house, to let the professionals handle the investigation. But when the call came through the police scanner app she'd downloaded, a call about suspicious activity at her own address, she'd made the impulsive decision to drive back, now, watching through the grimy windows as armed figures moved through the shadows. She realized she'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple neighborhood drug operation. Phoenix, this is Cardinal. The primary stash location has been compromised. The voice carried clearly through the broken window. Above her head. Henderson's in custody, and the property owner is asking too many questions. Margaret pressed herself deeper into the shadows, her phone recording everything despite her trembling hands. Phoenix and Cardinal, these weren't street-level dealers. This was organized crime with military-style communication protocols. Copy that, Cardinal. What's the status on our backup inventory? That's the problem. Everything was stored at the secondary location. We are looking at a complete loss, approximately $200,000 in product, plus operational funds. $200,000. Margaret's knees nearly buckled as the magnitude hit her. Her backyard hadn't just been used for small-time drug storage, it had been a major distribution hub. Phoenix, we have another issue. The property owner has surveillance equipment, Ring doorbells, security cameras. She's been documenting everything for months. A long pause crackled through the radio. When Phoenix responded, his voice carried a cold finality that made Margaret's blood freeze. Then she's seen too much. We need to clean this up permanently. Margaret bit back a gasp, accidentally bumping against a metal pipe. The sound seemed to echo through the warehouse like a gunshot. She held her breath, praying the men inside hadn't heard. Did you catch that? Cardinal's voice had shifted to high alert. Movement outside. Could be cops, could be nothing. Wrap this up fast. Margaret knew she had to get out of there immediately. But as she started to creep away from the building, her phone buzzed with a text that made her world tilt off its axis. The message was from an unknown number, but the photo attached was unmistakably clear. Lily, walking out of her after-school program, unaware that a black sedan was parked across the street. We know where your daughter goes to school, Margaret. We know where your sister lives. We know you're listening right now. Her hand shook so violently she nearly dropped the phone. They knew her name. They knew about Lily. They knew about the sister's house that was supposed to be their safe haven. Another message appeared. Warehouse District, Building 47. Come alone, or the little girl learns what happens to families who get in our way. Margaret stared at the screen in horror. Building 47. She was already here. This hadn't been coincidence or poor decision-making. They'd been watching her, tracking her movements, herding her toward this exact location. The sound of footsteps on gravel made her look up. 3 men were approaching from different directions, cutting off any escape routes. In the amber glow of the streetlights, she could see they were armed and professional. This wasn't a random kidnapping. This was an execution disguised as a cleanup operation. Ms. Chen, the tallest man called out, his voice eerily calm. Thank you for joining us. This will be much easier if you cooperate. Margaret's mind raced through her options. Run and risk them taking their anger out on Lily. Cooperate and probably die anyway, leaving her daughter orphaned. Fight and almost certainly guarantee both their deaths. But as the men closed in, she noticed something they'd missed in their tactical planning. The warehouse complex was old, built when environmental regulations were suggestions rather than laws. Steam still rose from several buildings, and the acrid smell in the air suggested active chemical processing. You've been very inconvenient, Ms. Chen, the leader continued as his associates flanked her. All we needed was a quiet place to conduct business. Instead, you had to play the good neighbor, document everything, involve the police. I didn't know, Margaret said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. I thought Karen was just a difficult neighbor. Karen Henderson was an idiot who let her personal grudges compromise a profitable operation. But you're smart enough to be dangerous. That surveillance system of yours captured 6 months of transactions. License plates, faces, patterns of activity. I'll delete everything, Margaret said desperately. I'll testify that I never saw anything. I just want my daughter to be safe. The man's laugh was genuinely amused. I'm sure you would. But we are businessmen, Ms. Chen. We can't build our operations on promises from concerned citizens. As he spoke, Margaret noticed movement in the shadows behind him. At first she thought it was more of his associates, but then she caught the distinctive outline of tactical gear and the subtle hand signals of law enforcement. Detective Reeves had found her. The thing about neighborhood drug operations, the leader continued, oblivious to the danger approaching from behind, is that they require trust. And trust requires consequences for those who violate it. You're right about consequences, Detective, Reeves announced, stepping into the light with her weapon drawn. You're all under arrest. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Margaret dove behind the shipping container as gunfire exploded around her, the metal ringing with the impact of bullets. Through the din, she could hear Reeves shouting commands into her radio, calling for backup and medical assistance. But in the middle of the firefight, Margaret's phone buzzed again. Another photo of Lily, this one showing her getting into a black sedan outside the school they'd taken her daughter, all the tactical operations, all the arrests, all the evidence gathering. None of it mattered if these criminals had Lily. Margaret realized with sick clarity that the warehouse confrontation had been a diversion, designed to keep law enforcement busy while they secured their real leverage. Reeves. Margaret screamed over the gunfire. They have my daughter. The detective's face went white as she processed the implication. The men they were arresting weren't the leadership. They were expendable foot soldiers whose job was to tie up loose ends while the real operation disappeared. Margaret's phone buzzed with a final message. Pier 19, 30 minutes. Come alone. With all surveillance equipment, or your daughter disappears forever. No police, no backup, no recording devices. Just a mother trying to save her child. As the last shots echoed through the warehouse and the suspects were secured, Margaret stared at the address on her screen. Pier 19 was in the industrial district, isolated and perfect for making people disappear without a trace. Detective Reeves approached, holstering her weapon. Margaret, we got them. You're safe. No, Margaret said quietly, showing her the phone. This was just the beginning. Reeves read the messages and cursed eloquently. We'll set up surveillance, tactical teams. They'll kill her if they see any police presence. You know that. We can't let you go in there alone. It's suicide. Margaret looked at her phone one more time, at the photo of her 8-year-old daughter being forced into a stranger's car. Lily, who still believed in fairness and justice, who trusted that adults would protect her from harm. Maybe, Margaret said, slipping the phone into her pocket. But she's my daughter. And I'm done letting other people make choices about my family's safety. As she walked toward her car, Margaret realized that the woman who'd spent the morning worrying about damaged roses no longer existed. In her place stood someone harder, more dangerous, someone who'd learned that when criminals threaten your child, the rules of civilized society become irrelevant. Karen Henderson had wanted to play games with an innocent suburban mother. Now she was about to discover what happened when that mother had nothing left to lose.